you're never really going to find your thing on the first try, right? You're almost always going to strike out. So it's really important to learn like who you don't want to be. So look at the attorneys in your office and then think, oh, that guy's a jerk. I don't want to do this. Or, that lady, not so nice. Like, I don't want to do these things. I want to treat people better than that. And then, what type of law you don't want to do, because usually you're doing a whole bunch of different types. And just take away those things that you really don't like. And then you can move on in your second and third job and hopefully find like your thing, like that one thing that you're going to be really excellent at. So for me, that was the big takeaway from that job was I didn't want to work for a big firm because I'm terrible at it. Like, I don't play well with others in that sense. And it was just boring as sin.
Welcome to the Founding Partner Podcast. Join your host, Jonathan Hawkins, as we explore the fascinating stories of successful law firm founders. We'll uncover their beginnings, triumph over challenges, and practice growth. Whether you aspire to launch your own firm, have an entrepreneurial spirit, or are just curious about the legal business, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Welcome to Founding Partner Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Hawkins. We've got a great guest this week. We've got Marco Brown. He's a family lawyer out of Utah. If you're on LinkedIn, there's no way you don't know who Marco is. We're going to talk about a lot about some of the stuff he posts there and a lot of other things. So, Marco, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us about your firm, sort of the makeup of it, where it is, that sort of thing.
Sure. So my name is Marco Brown. I own Brown Family Law in Salt Lake City. We serve the entire state of Utah, but we're in Salt Lake. So I started, and we'll get into the history of it, so I won't do too much, but started in 2010 with zero. And now we serve more people, their divorce cases, than anybody else in the state of Utah by a pretty wide margin at this point. What do we have? 17 attorneys right around in there, or very soon to be 17. I think there are a couple that are getting barred here pretty quickly. So right around that, I think 28 total for employees for the entire firm. And we're expanding past Utah, so we'll expand into Arizona this year, hopefully in Q3, and then into other states relatively quickly after that.
Yeah, I want to talk all about that stuff. Very interested in that. So when did you start the firm? 2010?
It was 2010. Okay,
so in 14 years, a lot of growth. That's impressive, what you've done. Before we get into all of that, I want to talk suits, So, historically, traditionally, lawyers, suits, that's what we do. But in recent years, not so much. But you are embracing the suits, and you post about it a lot. And, I've got suits, but your suits. So what got you into it?
No, let's just be clear. I know relatively little about the sartorial world, right? But I do like suits. So when I was younger, I lived in Italy for a couple of years. So from 19 to 21, I'm Mormon, and we serve religious missions. So I went over there for 2 years. And, that's one of the suit capitals of the world. So suits really start in England, and then they make their way down through France and down into Italy. So those are the three main schools of suits, right? And I tend to think this is important to know as attorneys, because suits are, for better or worse, our uniforms. Now, you don't have to. If you're an attorney that lives in Silicon Valley, you're never probably going to wear a suit. But, for those of us who are litigators, for those of us who go into court, like, suits are still our uniform. So I think it's important to kind of know these things. And when I was there in 1920, I was wearing American suits, and there are a whole bunch of Italians around in suits that look 10 times better than mine. And I was always kind of intrigued by that, but I didn't have any money to buy those suits. And then during COVID, I realized that all my suits sucked, and I never had to wear any anyway during that period of time. But then we get to the end of COVID, and I realized that all my suits were terrible. And I thought, okay, why don't I actually get into this now? It's something I've been interested in, and I have the money to kind of play around with it. And I knew kind of where I wanted to go in Italy to get these suits, because different Italian towns have different suit cultures. And I knew one in particular that I really adored, and I thought, all right, let's do that. So I did. I got into it, and I started learning about it, and then I had the city that I wanted, and I found people there and started having suits made, and it's glorious.
It's cool. a custom suit looks so much better than, off the rack that most young attorneys get, that they're too big for them and they're just sort of hanging off their shoulders. It definitely, definitely a way better look. And I guess you went Italian because you spent some time there versus, do you know the difference between sort of London and Italian? I really don't. So.
Yeah, so you'll have some pretty marked differences. And especially, so I went for a style in a city called Napoli, right? Naples. So Naples is a very distinctive suit look because Naples is just hotter than Hades in the summer. So in London, you have a look because London's cold and rainy, and Napoli is not. It's hot and there's not a ton of rain. So you can do different things with suits. Like in Napoli, you wear much lighter fabrics than you would in London. And London, tweed and flannel and these things are very popular. In Napoli, if you wore them, you would lose like a pound an hour of sweat. There's just no way you can do it. So that means the structures of the suits are very different. The looks of the fabrics are very different. The way they kind of drape off of you is different. The shoulders are very different because in English shoulders, they're usually very structured. There's a lot of padding in there. And in Napton suiting, there's almost no padding in there, right? Which is great for a guy like me because I got big shoulders. So, English suits make me look like a freak, essentially, like a huge shoulders, like they're way too big. But Nopton suits make my shoulders look great. And so there are these kind of marked differences between the two in those senses. And then also the Italian school is much more personalizable. The English school is really understated. You don't really want to notice the suit so much as you do the man who's wearing the suit. In Italy, they're like, yeah, screw that. Like, you're going to notice my suit. So you can do all sorts of cool things with your suits and personalize them in kind of any way you want. And I love that. I'm more of that style. So when you get to know the different schools, and then you can choose which one you really want. So French school is more kind of high fashion. And if you're really into that, very intricate, very precise, if you're into that sort of thing, then, go with the French. If you like kind of a normal, understated sort of suit that looks perfectly good, but there's not a ton about it, then you go with the English school. You want it personalizable, you want, lighter fabrics, so on and so forth, you go for the Italian school.
I like it. That's really cool. You're right. It's the suit. It is our uniform. So you might as well look good if you're going to do it. All right, so let's go back. You mentioned you grew up in Alaska. I know you've talked about this in some other podcasts, so I don't want to belabor the point, but give us a quick background. I mean, my understanding, it was like rugged Alaska, from there to nice Italian suits. It's a big contrast. So what was it like growing up, and then how did you end up in Utah?
Yeah, it's a big contrast. So yeah, this is a story I tell quite a lot because obviously it's my story, but it really resonates with like first generation people who go to college and then go on to law school and these sorts of things. Because I come from a little tiny village of 85 people in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. No one ever comes out of that village and does anything at all. I was fortunate to have parents that were really well educated and very ethical people, and then my grandmother was very educated. So we had a little bit different trajectory. But yeah, my dad ran a salmon hatchery out there, and my mom worked as an air traffic controller, and it was just wide open spaces, like literally wide open spaces, tons of wildlife around. I mean, there were bears, caribou, wolves, foxes, all of it. And I was just outside all the time with all of that. Like, you just went and explored because there weren't a ton of kids around and there were no video games. There were no cell phones. There was nothing like that. So I spent a humongous amount of time outside in my own head, just talking through stuff, figuring out how to get from A to B and, what to do. And as I look back on it, when I was a kid, I always thought that I was deprived because I didn't have a lot of other kids around. I didn't have a lot of things that the city had. But now as I look at it at 47, I just think, wow, I'm so eternally grateful for that experience. And I wish my kids could have that experience, but we got a different one, but they're always connected. And I was never connected. And that, I think, really helped my brain develop and made me into the person that I am and allowed me to think differently enough about things and be rugged enough and individualistic enough that I could lead a law firm.
So have you read that book, Comfort Crisis?
I think I have, yeah. I think it was a few years
It's
ago, but I think I did.
Yeah, it's a cool book, and it's, the big arc of the story is this guy goes to the Alaskan outback, I mean, in the middle of nowhere to hunt caribou. And he talks about, the benefits and why humans need to be out there. It's a really cool book. Okay, so at some point, you got out of Alaska, went to college, and
Yeah.
then eventually law school.
Yeah. So that's the next arc. So I did 0 to 13 in Cold Bay, which is the village we've been talking about with 85 people. And then I went to Anchorage for high school. So Anchorage back then was probably 200,000 people. So it was, it was a city. And then college came, and then it was time to leave and to become social, right? Because I had never done that kind of thing. So that's how I got down to the lower 48. That's how I got down to Utah. Was I went to BYU, Brigham Young University. And my parents really wanted me to go there. I had no intention of going there, so they sent me there one summer, and I just absolutely fell in love with the place. Utah's a beautiful state, the mountains, and the campus at BYU is right on the Rocky Mountains. Like, it's just absolutely stunningly gorgeous. So that was how I got down here to Utah.
Yeah, I love it out there. I've spent some time, but not enough. I mean, it's nice. So I guess you do a lot of skiing.
No, not even a little bit.
No?
No, that never
Oh,
took
man.
with me. No, but we live right, like literally, I'm looking at the Wasatch Mountains. I am 3 minutes from Little Cottonwood Canyon, and I can just go hike whenever I want. Hiking is my thing.
Nice, man. It is beautiful out there. All right, so you end up going to law school. We'll sort of skip through that a little bit, and then you started practicing law. And I think I may have this wrong, but I think you started in insurance defense. Is that right?
I did start in insurance defense, yes.
All right, so
And
I started in that too.
literally the worst job I ever had in my entire life.
So what was good about it, and what was bad about it, or was there anything good?
Yeah,
About it?
there were some good things. There were some good things in the negative. So good things, and I tell this to every law student I can talk to. Your first job at a law school is really, you should learn two things. You should learn how not to act as an attorney and what not to do as an attorney, like what field you should not be in, because you're never really going to find your thing on the first try, right? You're almost always going to strike out. So it's really important to learn like who you don't want to be. So look at the attorneys in your office and then think, oh, that guy's a jerk. I don't want to do this. Or, that lady, not so nice. Like, I don't want to do these things. I want to treat people better than that. And then, what type of law you don't want to do, because usually you're doing a whole bunch of different types. And just take away those things that you really don't like, and then you can move on in your second and third job and hopefully find like your thing, like that one thing that you're going to be really excellent at. So for me, that was the big takeaway from that job. Was I didn't want to work for a big firm because I'm terrible at it. Like, I don't play well with others in that sense. And it was just boring as sin. And I had some attorneys around me, and I couldn't stand the way they acted. They weren't unethical, but they just didn't really like what they did. So that really came across in the way they talked to me, the way they talked to the paralegals, the way they talked to their clients and so forth. And, all of those kind of negative examples, like, they were incredibly useful for me, because I got out and I thought, okay, this is, I don't want to do these things, and I want to do kind of the opposite of those things if I ever have my own firm. And that has been incredibly valuable over time. So that was the good thing. The bad thing, everything else. So insurance litigation is really, it's not litigation. Like, you just sit around and stare at a computer screen. You never go to court. The other person makes all the money and you make none of the money. You have to deal with insurance companies who regularly chop off 15% of your bill simply because, like, at random. Like, they just like mark stuff off at random, and then you have to try to justify it, and then you have to make up that time. Like, everything about it was just absolutely horrendous, I thought.
Yeah, I feel you. The good thing, the thing you talked about, there's a lot of wisdom there. I tell a lot of people, they're like, how do I find my niche and that sort of thing? It's usually by subtraction.
Yep.
It's usually, you're not going to end up there first. And that's the other thing I see a lot of. I'm sure you have too. I went through it myself. You get into your first job and then you're like, this sucks. And then the first thought is, I don't want to be a lawyer anymore. And so people are always trying to get out of the law, where really maybe that is the answer, but maybe the answer is, well, you're just in the wrong area, and look for the thing that you can enjoy for a long time.
Yep.
So how did you find, you do family law now, how did you sort of end up there from the insurance defense?
Yeah, so I lived insurance defense after 18 months. That was as long as I could take. So I leave. My wife wants to get a doctorate at the University of Utah. We went to BYU, a rival school, so it's like Ohio State, and you want to go to Michigan. Like, it still doesn't work. Like, I hate that school, but whatever. My wife got a doc from there. From there, it's all right. So we moved back here to Utah, and this is 2010, so it's in the middle of the Great Recession. Nobody's hiring, and I have figured out that I am unemployable anyway because I just don't work for other people. Like, it just doesn't function for me. So I realized the only way I was going to make anything of myself as a lawyer was to start my own firm. So I did, and I just took everything that came in the door. I had a friend of mine who needed to get divorced. She came in and I needed money. So I said, cool, let's do this. So I stayed up the night before until like 2 o'clock in the morning, learning everything I could about divorce in Utah. Took her money and then figured it out and got her a really good result. And I thought, oh, actually that worked out pretty well. And then other people started coming in for divorce, and I liked how I felt when I did it, helping them in a really difficult time in their life. And I figured out I was good at it, and I kept getting better at it, and I figured out I was really good at it. And then, 2-3 years later, I won the best divorce attorney in Utah. I was voted on by my peers in the Bar Association, which was, I'm still the youngest person ever to win that. And I thought, okay, this is all I'm ever going to do for the rest of my life. I guess this is my thing.
Nice. So I've heard you talk about the early days of starting your firm and how it was a huge struggle. I think other people go through that. So the first thing I want to talk about that and how you got through it. But before we do, so your wife was in grad school when you started this. Were you at that time the sole breadwinner?
So she brought in a stipend of about $1,500 a month. But other than that, yes, it was me.
So pressure was on, right? I mean, you had to make it happen. So tell us about those early days.
So yeah, pressure was on. I actually went back to the job I had during college. And not like the good job I had during college, like the crappy job I had during college. I made $8.50 an hour as an attorney. So I'd work nights and weekends just to make ends meet, to be able to pay for food for my family and cover the rent and that type of thing. So between the two of us, like, we were able to eke out an existence, and then we had one son at that point. So we were able to kind of make it work, but I didn't see him very often. I worked probably 80, 90 hours a week, somewhere around there. And that was the first, I'd say 7 months until about month 6 or month 7, people paid. So I hadn't been paid anything in the law firm for 6 or 7 months. And I was actually going to go get a firm job because at that point, I'm like, I just can't do this. I'm not cut out for this. Like, people aren't paying me. I don't know how to do this. So I was going to go do the thing I hated the most. And then thankfully, completely divine intervention is what I believe here. Everybody pays. They paid $17,000 in like a week. And I hadn't been doing anything different. They all just decided to pay at the same time. And that was, at that point, I'm like, oh, okay, now I can do this. And I figured some things out. But yeah, those 6 or 7 months at the very beginning were incredibly stressful and difficult. I completely lied to my wife for 6 or 7 months, like just telling her what she wanted to hear, that everything was okay, right? And that is, I do not suggest that to people, but that is the path I chose to inoculate my wife from what was actually going on. But it was horrendous, man. I look back on those times, and I gained weight during that period of time. I didn't sleep well during that period of time. I mean, I'm glad I went through it, but I really don't want my colleagues to go through things like that, because there are only a certain amount of people in the world that can take that kind of stress and come out on the other end unscathed. And thankfully, I'm one of those people, but man, there aren't that many others.
Yeah, that's tough. That is tough. I was talking to an attorney the other day who early on, he took out a ton of credit card debt and didn't tell his wife till later. Got out of it, but yeah.
Oh man, we lie to our spouses so much. It's not good. It's not good.
But so you said that at the beginning they didn't pay. So I guess you weren't taking retainers, or was it you weren't sending invoices, or they just weren't paying?
Yeah, it was kind of a combination. I didn't know anything about business at all. I never had a job where I was entrepreneurial. I was not entrepreneurial. Like that's just wasn't my skill set whatsoever. So I didn't think like that. I didn't know. I think I had one retainer in 6 months that I drew on, but the rest of it was just, pay me this. And then they just didn't pay, and I did the work anyway because I was scared out on my mind that if I didn't do the work that they would pay me or they'd send me to the bar or something, whatever you can concoct in your mind to scare yourself, that's what I did. So I just didn't get paid. And I would kind of bug them, but they would just put me off. And then, like I said, within a week, like 16, 17,000 bucks. It was absolutely insane.
That is a skill, getting paid, that they don't teach you. And it's awkward saying, hey, you owe me some money, you got to pay. It's an awkward conversation to have, but you get used to it, I guess, eventually.
You absolutely do. Unless
you start out, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, unless you never want to eat, you get used to asking people for money.
Yeah. Okay, so you start out, you're making no money, you're doing a lot of different things, you start making a little money, you figure out within a couple of years, sort of divorce, family laws, where you're going to go. When did you start to actually say, this is it, we're growing, I'm hiring somebody? And then what was your first hire? I'm curious about that.
Oh, yeah. So I will say this, that the most important thing I did during this period of time, because this represents, the first 5 years were really difficult, but the best thing I did during that period of time was to figure out how to get paid, actually. So I realized at month 6 or 7, I'm like, and when everybody paid, I thought, oh, okay, now I really do need to kind of figure this out a little bit. And there were some other situations that came up that really, gave me the impetus to create a system to get paid. And it wasn't until I made a commitment to get paid 100% for the work I did and then figured out a system to make that happen that we could actually grow. So that happens in about 2015. Then I start hiring people around 2016. I mean, I'd hired a couple people before then. The first hire was paralegal / office manager / person to answer the phones and do all that, gopher stuff, that sort of thing. And then a contract attorney after that. But 16 was really when I had the money and I was able to start hiring people on, so I could step away from the 112 active case files that I had that kept me from sleeping quite a bit.
Wow. That's a lot of cases. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, this is family law, right? Like in PI, you can have 300 cases and you're okay. But in family law, you got 112. That is not a good place to be, man. Not a good place.
Those are high maintenance clients, aren't they?
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was not at the top end of the economic spectrum at this point. Let's put it that way. So once you get higher up in the economic spectrum in family law, essentially people pay more, then they actually back off and they're not as needy on average. But I was in like the bottom of the spectrum, and so there were needy and there were 112 of them. And that was, again, not a good place to be.
So, a lot of lawyers, they get really scared for that first attorney hire because they see the big salary and they think of it as, oh my God, I'm taking on this huge commitment. And it just, sometimes they're just frozen in fear and they can't do it. What allowed you or gave you the confidence to do it?
It was straight fear. It was just that I was up to my eyeballs in work. And if I didn't hire somebody, I was going to commit malpractice. And I'm not entirely sure I didn't commit malpractice anyway during that period of time. But, I wanted to minimize the malpractice. So I hired somebody on. But it was sheer fear. There was nothing else.
The other funny thing is lawyers are scared for that first hire and then they finally do it. And then they see the benefits of the leverage and then they're like, holy crap, why didn't I do this earlier?
Yep. As attorneys, we're able to leverage two things, essentially. We're able to leverage technology and people. And, I'm 47. I'm not inventing an app, so I got people. And that, like you said, that first hire is really like, oh, hey, that worked out. That was great. Like, why didn't I do this 3 years ago, right? Every time I've ever talked to an attorney who hires somebody, that first time, that second time, they're like, why didn't I do this 3-4 years ago, right? So, yeah, for everybody out there that's really kind of reticent about it, 100%, like almost 100% of the time, that's the reaction that attorneys have. So,
Real quick, thanks for listening. If you're getting any value out of this podcast, please take 2 seconds to hit the subscribe button and leave a 5-star review. It would really mean a lot to me. Now back to the show. So we've talked about your first hire, and you have 17 or so attorneys now, 28 employees. So you've done a lot of growth. And take us through sort of maybe the evolution of that growth. I'm sure it sort of was slow and then boom.
yeah.
And then the other thing that personally I know from personal experience, but then talking to others, I'm of the opinion you have to decide to grow.
Yes.
It's not going to be an accident. It's a decision you have to make, and you got to have a mindset. So take us through the moment you decided we're going to do it and then how you did it.
Okay. So the moment really comes in, the moment to decide on growth really comes in 2015. I call this the great shower incident of 2015. So I am, again, 0 to 5 years in the firm. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm doing really well in the lawyering part. The business part, it's terrible. I've let myself get fat at this point. My emotional life is not great. My spiritual life's not great. Like, thankfully, my wife is still with me, even though I'm kind of a mess here. But I'm doing really good work for my clients, so I'm trying. But I love showers, and the problem with showers during this period of time is I'd get in, and then I'd start thinking about cases, and I'd get super stressed, right? So I'm taking a shower, and I'm cool for the first 5 minutes, and then I start thinking about cases again. And it happens. And what happens is my heart starts to beat really fast and palpitate. And then I start getting constriction in my chest, and I start getting what I know will be a stress headache, like a really bad stress headache. It starts on the crown of my head and then comes, and it will envelop my face by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, because this has happened to me a lot of times. And I just think, oh man, it's happening again. And this one was different though, because I was at this point, for whatever reason, I was shown my future, and I was about 60 to 65 years old, and it was at my own funeral, and I was dead in a casket. And I was being mourned by children I didn't even have at that point. They were there literally mourning my dead body. And this probably goes on for 10 seconds, the seeing of my future. And then I'm out of it. And I remember sitting there thinking, oh, that's not good. Because this was not like, this may happen. It's like, you keep doing this, will happen. This is your life. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to have that happen. That's not going to be me. So I had to change everything. And I knew that I had to grow, because if I kept doing 112 case files like this, I was going to die. And that was the moment of, okay, growth. And then I had to figure out kind of how to do that. And I'm not the brightest guy in the earth, so that took years to figure that out. So I think we had three attorneys when COVID hit. So that's 2020. So this is 5 years later. There have been 3 attorneys added. And then COVID hits, and it just blows up, dude, because we do not retreat into that good night. I decided that, like, we're going to take advantage of this because everybody else is retreating, and we're just going to expand into it. So we start expanding heavily. We start spending more money, and then, people didn't like each other during COVID, so there was an increase in divorces, and we had been evidently well placed in the market. So we just start getting large increases in clients. And then I just start adding attorneys, right? Like, there are the hours there, and I just start hiring attorneys kind of as fast as I can. So from the initiation to COVID until now, we've added 14 attorneys. So that was really the impetus for it. Yeah.
Wow. So you've at least doubled, probably between 2 and 3 times since COVID.
Yeah.
So it's like what,
We've
3 years, 4 years?
Yeah, I think we've increased 4 times, 4x since COVID, maybe something like that.
Wow, impressive. I like that. All right, so we got a lot to cover. There's something you talk a lot about. I've heard you talk about. It's your 300 list. So I've started to make mine. Like you said, explain what it is. I'll tell you, I've started to make mine, and it is hard to get 300.
It's so hard.
But you inspired me to do that. So tell us what it is and how you came upon that.
Yeah, so this is Steve Harvey. I think I actually figured this one out. I came upon this watching Grant Cardone do an interview with Steve Harvey. And Steve Harvey's a really interesting guy if you've never kind of sat down and listened to him. So comedian, actor, but he also does inspirational videos. And one of them was, write your future and make it plain. It comes off Habakkuk 2:2 and in the Old Testament. And so that's what he did. He just started writing stuff down and he came up with this 300 list. And the idea of the 300 list is usually it's really easy to have like 10 goals or 20 goals, but it's incredibly difficult to sit down and think about 300 things you actually want in your life, right? So once you get past like 40 or 50 kind of bigger things, then you're left with 250 other things you have to kind of figure out. And then you're diving deep into your own brain, into your own psyche, into your own spirit to figure out what's truly important to you, right? Like what are the huge things and the primary things that you want in your own life. And it's an exercise unlike any other exercise I've ever done. And I spend a lot of time in my own head. I've always been that kind of introspective thinker, but like this was, my goodness, like what's incredibly important to me. And it all came out on the page, but it takes hours, days, and weeks to put those together. But it has been one of the most rewarding exercises I've ever done in my entire life.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I didn't really say what. So it's whatever you want. I call it my 300 things I want from God, right? It's literally whatever you want. So if you want a red Lamborghini or, a red Puro Sangue from Ferrari, like write it down, right? Like it's anything and everything you want. You're getting it onto a page.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, like you said, after about 50, maybe, 300, it's hard. I haven't gotten there yet. Yeah. So you recently posted, maybe this week, or at least I saw it this week, that you accomplished one of the biggest goals. I assume this was on your 300 list, but, first of all, congrats on that goal, but tell us about that.
Okay. Yeah, this is, I think, number 5. I think I looked at it the other day. It's number 5 on my 300 list. Actually, I can look at it right now. No, yeah, it's number 5 on my 300 list. So again, living in Italy, when I was there, I thought, oh, it'd be great to kind of own a place over here. And, I go back a lot because it's my happy place. But then a few years ago, my wife and I started talking and we really solidified that we wanted to buy a property over in Italy in the hills south of a town called Bologna. So Bologna is about 50 miles north of Florence. And it was my first city I ever lived in Italy. So it has a piece of my heart. And I thought, I just thought, all right, that'd be great to do it. And then we made it a goal and it was deeply meaningful. And it saw me through a lot of rough times because we had this goal before COVID, and COVID was, rough on a lot of political levels and every other type of level. So it kept us going through that, and it's really sustained me. And last week I went over and finalized it and paid cash for it. It was just an absolutely amazing experience. It's 20 acres, about 35 miles south of the city in the foothills, in the Apennine foothills. Absolutely gorgeous. Like we couldn't wish for a nicer place out there.
Wow. Well, congrats. So it sounds like you're going to be spending a lot more time over there now.
We'll be spending a sufficient amount of time over there. Yeah. But again, that was kind of one of the easier ones on the 300 list. But for that exercise of the 300 list, I probably wouldn't have had that goal that was crystallized in that way, that sustained me and like forced me to become a different person than I was, because the person I was when I made that goal was absolutely and completely incapable of actually realizing that goal. So I knew that to do this thing, I needed to become a different human than I was. And that's the power of goals, really. And that's the power of having a 300 list. And it's the power of, having a vision and doing these things that almost no attorneys do. I talk with other attorneys, even very respected and high level attorneys, and almost none of them have a vision, a crystallized vision for their future or large goals that they're trying to obtain. They're usually just trying to pay like electric bills and, take vacations and stuff like that. And like, how does that inspire you to become a better person? I don't understand. Like, I think it's impossible.
Yeah. So, okay. Let's talk. So you bought the villa, which huge goal you had to reach to get there. You had to set up your life to be able to get there. And the attaining of the actual villa is one thing. the other thing is you're now going to spend a lot of time over there.
Yes.
So another piece of this is you got to design your firm and your life so it can run while you're over there. And, so a lot of attorneys are out there saying, oh, that sounds great, but how am I going to be able to run my firm from Italy? So I know you've thought through that. And again, you've probably been working on that for years, but what did you do to set up your firm and design it in a way that's now you're going to be able to do that from Italy?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So years and years ago, actually the first person in 2015 that I ever kind of glommed onto to learn the business of law was a guy named Lee Rosen. And Lee's still around. There are things that Lee taught me in the beginning that I still implement, and I'm very grateful for. And there's a lot of stuff that I've kind of passed what Lee has done in the advice, so I take it from other sources. But in the beginning, like, this guy was absolutely indispensable, and so grateful for him. But one of the things he talked about is, hey, look, make your law firm in such a way that you can be anywhere on earth and run the thing. And I always thought, oh, that's really interesting. This is 2015, so that was doable, but it was much more difficult than it was now. So that I always set it up that way, not to be able to like completely walk away from it, but just to be able to like go to Venice and for a week, right, and be able to do things from there. So that was the first thing that's necessary is literally set it up in such a way and have the tech in such a way that you can be the leader of the law firm from any point on earth. So you have to do that. And that's relatively simple nowadays with Slack and Zoom and Google Drive, Dropbox, whatever it is. Like, that's probably 5 or 10 programs you can make that happen. That's not that bad. But the much more difficult and interesting part of it is you need to get the horses on the team in order to allow you to actually do this sort of stuff. Otherwise, if you're gone for 2 weeks, everything's going to blow up. So then really at that point, it's like, okay, how do I find people that align with my values and are going to work hard? And how do I incentivize them and pay them in such a way that they will work even when I'm not physically present, right? So I need the types of people that will work when I'm not there, and I need an incentive structure that allows them to make money and for this thing to grow even if I'm not around. And what kind of training does that take? What kind of talent acquisition does that take? That's much, much more difficult, but exponentially more interesting as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the things you've done. I've heard you talk about sort of the sales training that you've gone through and that I think you have your team members go through.
Yes.
So talk about that. That's a pretty cool system. You don't hear many law firm leaders talk about that. So I want to hear more about that.
Nope. Lawyers don't like to talk about this because lawyers want to think of themselves as better than salespeople. You're not. You're a salesperson. You just sell high-level stuff. You sell ideas. You sell arguments. You sell, problem solving. And you're not selling a car. You're selling these different things. But you're a salesperson just the same. So I realized this at one point, that this was a skill set that I did not have and that I would need to learn if I wanted to do the things that we've been talking about, which is make the money to buy a villa and make enough money to actually go over there and so forth. So I went and I just searched for people to train me on sales, and I happened upon a guy named Grant Cardone and bought his books, read his books. They were great. Especially one in particular, I've read 24 times. And then I thought, okay, well, we should probably go to a training. So I went to the training, the sales training, and then my intake person went to the sales training with me. And that's where we really sat down, and we had some scripts, right, that we ran on phones and that I kind of followed while I was doing consultations. But really, like, we solidified all of the scripts, all of everything we were going to talk about when we were in the sales training in Miami. And it cost $10,000 to take both of us there and do that. And it was the best $10,000 I've ever spent on business in my entire life, like bar none. The return on investment on those $10,000 is millions and millions and millions of dollars. And at that point, like, it was so successful for us that we decided to implement it with everybody who was client facing in the law firm. So if you were ever going to sit down with somebody and talk to them on the phone and try to get them to come in and consult with us, so intake team, or if you were an attorney and you were ever going to do an initial consult with a client, then you had to do sales training every day. And that's what we do.
And is it sort of, do you have a role playing aspect of it?
Yes.
And then are you constantly reminding, I mean, how do you keep it front of mind for these people and make sure they're sharp?
So yeah, we practice every day. So there's kind of a half and a half. There's a video at the beginning of the training, and then we role play specific situations. And the role play is really the thing more than anything else. So I've gone through and I've written a book about the sales process in our law firm and how to deal with different objections and so forth, and the script. Like, it's all in a book. And then we just, we go through that. We talk about, oh, hey, what do you do if somebody says, I don't have the money right now, or that's too much money? There are probably, 7, 8 different types of specific closes that you can use if somebody says, I don't have the money right now. And then we role play those. But it is the role play. It's a learned skill. Nobody's really great at this stuff, and I was terrible at it. And it's literally a skill that you just have to sit down and go over again and again. I mean, think about it like this. When you're a litigator, no one is great at trial, right? I don't care who you are. I don't care how adept you are, how smart you are, anything like that. No one's good at trial at the beginning. You only get good at trial by, 1, doing trials, and 2, practicing, getting in front of a mirror, talking these things out, talking with your colleagues, testing out ideas, so on and so forth. That's the only way you get better as a litigator. And that's the only way you get better as a salesperson, is that type of active practice.
So true. It's like riding a bike. You can read about it, you can watch it, you can think about it, but you got to get up there and fall a few times before you figure it out.
Yeah. It's like friendship too. Like, it's weird. Nowadays, they have all of these little modules to teach kids how to make friends, like 5-year-olds. Like, how do you make friends? You're like, you can make friends by going and making friends. Like, what the hell? Like, you just go, and then you're a jerk to some people, and you think, oh, well, that didn't work so well. I probably won't do that next time, right? But that's the only way you can do it, and that's the only way you learn sales. It's the only way you learn how to be a really good attorney. That's it.
So another thing about, you mentioned the 10,000 you invested. I don't know exactly when that was, but I bet you when you invested that was a big nut and a big check, and probably you had to, think about that. But another thing you talk about is investing in yourself. I'm a big believer in that as well. And, you think about, let's say you had $100,000. There's all these places you can invest. You can put it in a savings account, you can put it in the S&P, you can do this, you can do that. But I'm with you. If you invest it in you and your skill development, the return on that is going to be exponential. And so when you spent the 10,000, was that a tough check to write? And I'm sure there were other times, like Lee Rose and others that you've hired along the way, that for those out there that say, I don't have the money, I can't do it, what would you say to them?
Yeah, you don't have the money and you can't do it, and you're going to figure out a way to do it anyway. Because here's the thing. If somebody comes up to you, and this resonates more with guys than it does with ladies, but if you're a guy and somebody comes up to you and says, hey, you see this Lamborghini right here? It's worth $300,000. Like, I'll give it to you for $20,000. You're gonna find a way, and you don't have $20,000. You're gonna find a way to get those $20,000, right? Because you're gonna buy that car and you can just flip it, right? But you recognize that the value of the thing that you can't afford is so high that you are going to find whatever money in whatever way possible to get that thing. And what they don't realize is that their future selves is that Lamborghini. Like, your future self, when you have the skill set and the knowledge that you actually want, you are exponentially more valuable than you are right now. And that's what people don't get about themselves, is they don't see that, right? They don't believe themselves to be that future person that's incredibly valuable. But once you realize that you are, then you will do anything and everything to become that person, to spend the money to become that person. And it's just, you have to have the realization that you can be that, and the confidence to go find the money to become that.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, every lawyer spent 3 years and a bunch of money going to law school. I mean, that was an investment in yourself, and you believed it was going to pay off. But for some reason, after they get a job, they stop.
Yep.
It's like,
Exactly. I spent I took out $160,000 in loans to go to the University of Nebraska. A great school. I loved it and whatnot. Ridiculously expensive for that school. Like I was just stupid, but yeah, I had absolutely no problem doing that because I think it's because socially we're kind of told that's an acceptable spend, right? Because it's within a structure and this is what smart people do and this is what high class people do and so on and so forth. And there's kind of a realization of return and so forth, and it's a little more kind of visible. But then you're right, once you get out, like that ends and you forgot. I forgot for years that I spent frickin' $160,000 on myself when there was no possible way I could ever repay that money at that point. But then I stopped investing in myself, and that was a humongous mistake on my part. I wish I had continued investing in myself to the tune of about 10% of my income. I wish I had done that forever, and I'd be worth tens of millions of dollars more than I am right now if I had. But everybody has that opportunity. They just have to realize, like, oh, I did it once, and it actually worked out. So why don't I do it again? Probably at a smaller scale. I wouldn't say take out that kind of money, but at a smaller scale to become, again, somebody that you're not right now, but to really up those skills.
yeah. And another thing that attorneys seem to have problem with is sort of showing personality or showing their personality. They all want to get in line and just blend in with everybody else, copy what everybody else is doing.
Yep.
You don't have that problem, which I like. So, some of the things for the people who maybe don't follow you, I see you on LinkedIn. I don't know if you're on other platforms too, but that's where I am. And, one of the things you talk about is making money, and you're not shy about it. I don't know if you catch flack for that or not, but, tell us about that, and you're proud about it. So,
Oh, yeah.
What's your attitude?
Yeah, you're darn right I'm proud about it. So I had a grandmother who was the smartest woman I have ever met in my entire life. Effortlessly intelligent. She was a great researcher. She had a doctorate. She was a professor, and such a good woman. But she did not know how to make money. She died and left my parents very little money. She lived on very little money. She lived in kind of a double wide at the end of her life. She had moved back to rural Colorado where she was born after she finished up being a professor and a researcher. And I always thought, that kind of sucks. Like she was way smarter than that. And then, I went through this period where I didn't have any money for the first 5-6 years of the law firm. And I realized the stress that was putting not only on me, but on my kid, my son at that point, and then my wife. And that wasn't okay. Like I was supposed to provide for them, and I wasn't providing for them. And I wasn't providing for my team either. They were getting paid garbage. And they were getting paid garbage because I didn't make money. And that to me became unacceptable after a while. And I realized that I was just allowing my clients to not pay me 100%. They were stealing from me, right? Because I was doing the work and my team was doing the work and my family was going through this. But they decided that they didn't want to pay me 100%. And I said, screw that, man. Like they're going to pay 100% and I'm not going to worry about money anymore. So that became really important to me. And the only way you can make a lot of money is by wanting to make a lot of money. And, if you hate money, then you're not going to make that much of it. So I just decided, okay, I'm really going to enjoy this. I'm going to like making money. I'm going to like providing for my family, providing for my team, creating economic opportunity where I can. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. But I've also embraced it. Like my favorite t-shirt is this black t-shirt with a red pig on it that says capitalist pig. Right? Like I'm cool. I'm cool like that. Like I'm willing to go out and do those sorts of things because I'm mean and I'm Alaskan. And that was the thing, it goes back to my childhood when I was able to just go like think my own thoughts and be my own person. And I love it. So yeah, I live out loud, man. And I don't think there's any other way to do it. And to your point, really, the vast majority of attorneys don't. The vast majority of attorneys live a life in which they go to work to not make waves and then retire and not make waves and die. And you know what? To hell with that. I don't accept that in my life. So I don't live that way.
Well, I like it. So we've talked about the struggles you went through, the challenges early on. You've got a big firm now. We'll talk about where it's going later, but More money, more problems, probably. So what are the challenges now in running a big operation that you have?
Yeah.
They're different. They're always different than they were before, but they never go away. So what are some of the big challenges now?
No, they never go away. You're absolutely right. In fact, you want problems. You want more problems because the solving of problems is how you make money. But you want the right types of problems. So you want to create the types of problems that you want. So, for example, is just one example. I send out a newsletter to every attorney in the state of Utah. It's about 10,000 a month. And that creates some issues. Like some people don't want to receive the newsletter. They can just throw in the trash. I don't know what the big deal is. But anyway, so I catch flack for that sometimes. That's just, kind of one example of that. But you're also creating the problem is there are a lot of referrals. There are a lot of referrals that come in off of that. And then how do we deal with the influx of people? We have to design our systems and so forth. But those are the types of problems that I want. Those are the types of problems that I want to curate and create so we can grow as a firm. The problems that you don't want are those kind of unintended problems that you haven't thought through. And those, you really do have to sit down and think about it. Like, how is this going to work? Like, what's the downside here? And then you come up with your best solution and try to anticipate, but you're never going to be able to anticipate everything. So you're just going to have to tweak the systems as you go along. Like one of the problems that we're facing right now that I've never really had in the past is we have to talk with attorneys about getting their hours in. Like there's enough work, but people they come in for half a day and then they leave. When you have a smaller law firm, that was never a problem. Like we never had that problem, but here we do. So we have to think, okay, what kind of system do we set up such that we can quality control the number of hours that are being billed in a day, and how to motivate attorneys to get their work in and so on and so forth. And that's been a major one that I never really anticipated. But yeah, you just have to adjust and figure it out.
And another challenge that you're probably encountering, and you're going to encounter more, is when you have offices in other states, lots of other states. That's a new challenge, which I'm sure you're going to be ready for. Let's talk about your vision for your firm. You're big in Utah. You said you're in Arizona, or I don't know how much in Arizona on the way, but you want to go other places. So what's the vision for the firm?
Yeah, so the vision for the firm is $75 million in revenue per year within 10 years. So, and I believe it's, how many states does that represent? 12 states, I think. I think 12 different jurisdictions is kind of what we figure. So yeah, Arizona is the first one, and then we will expand from there. We've done some market analyses on different options, probably mostly in the south and in the east a bit. So stuff, places like Nashville, Dallas. We've contemplated Denver as well. Anyway, so sorry, I'm getting a little too much into the weeds here, but we've done these market analyses and looked at the places that we really want to be, and then Arizona is the test case. So we're going to go into Arizona, break some stuff, see what works and what doesn't, because I'm not ready to do this at all. I have absolutely no idea how to do this. And there are very few firms in the United States, family law firms, that ever do this. So I don't really have a great blueprint. So we're just going to go in and we're going to do it, and we're going to break a whole bunch of stuff and then see what functions and what doesn't and fix it. And then we'll go on to the next one. But 1 to 2 will be hard, but 2 to 3 is going to be significantly easier than 1 to 2. And, that's okay. I feel a lot of trepidation about it, but I feel a lot of trepidation about every meaningful thing in my entire life. So it's really just time to start breaking stuff and see what functions.
I'm with you. If you're not scared, you're not going big enough.
Yep.
So you got to have some fear.
Yep.
So I don't know how you plan to expand, but to the extent anybody's listening that may want to reach out to help you seed some of these jurisdictions, how can they get in touch with you?
Yeah, they can email me if they want. So it's marco@brownfamilylaw.com. And I've changed my mind on this a little bit in the sense that Arizona is the one that makes the most sense. So we'll go there. My mom lives in Arizona. My dad died about 6 months ago, but my mom lives in Arizona. So it all just makes a lot of sense, and it's very close to Utah. So it's a good kind of test case. But I thought, okay, we're going to pick markets and then go into those markets very systematically, regardless of kind of who's there, but based on market conditions and that sort of thing. But then I've rethought it, and I thought, oh, no, this is going to be based on who are the best people we can find to run the thing. And then we'll go into those markets first, because you have to be able to trust the person that you hire. Like, that first hire is incredibly important. So we have to be able to trust that person. And if I can find somebody in Nashville that I trust more than in, West Palm Beach, then, we'll go to Nashville, or we'll go to Alabama, or, wherever it is. Like that the person is really the most important thing when you're hiring and when it comes to talent, because we're law firms and we got nothing to offer people but for our talent. So that's what we're really searching for.
Well, that's cool. So I've got one more question. The world really wants to know, Marco, what's your middle name? Just kidding.
No, I'll tell people
you can fill people in on why I asked the question.
Oh, yeah. So I have a rule. I don't like it when people give unsolicited advice to you and actually expect you to care about it. Like, I get on and on LinkedIn, I just talk about my own experience, right? And if you choose to take that or not and use it, great. If you choose to not use it, fine. That's okay. I don't sit there and tell people this is your path and this is kind of what you should do. I am annoyed by people like that. And people do that to me all the time. So I have a rule that I will just ask people, do you know my middle name? And no one knows my middle name because I never use it. And that person says, no, I don't know your middle name. And I say, then I don't care what you think. Because you don't know me well enough to have any opinion about my life if you don't even know my middle name. So that's where it comes from. But my middle name is Clayton. And it's a family name. And it's a beautiful name. I really like it. My first son it's my grandfather's name, my dad's name, my middle name, and then my son's middle name as well. So it'll go down through the family, but it's just not a name I ever use. Like, I almost never use my last name either, because I'm the white guy that's named Marco. Like, there aren't that many of them in the United States. So I barely ever use my last name Brown either.
Well, I appreciate you coming on today. This has been real fun. I like what you're doing. Keep doing. I love reading your stuff on LinkedIn. If you're expanding to Georgia, Atlanta, let me know. I'll help any way I can.
It's a good market, man. It's a good market.
It's growing. Yeah, it's growing.
It's huge.
So may see you here at some point. So again, thank you for coming on, and I'll see you on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Founding Partner Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on the latest episodes. You can also connect with Jonathan on LinkedIn and check out the show notes with links to resources mentioned throughout our discussion by visiting www.yourlawfirmgc.com. We'll see you next time for more origin stories and insights from successful law firm founders.